Great Pyramid of Giza. Some scientists now believe it was already ancient before the first pharaoh was born. What have we learned about the huge granite spirit stones in the heart of the pyramid? Do they still perform some eerie function?
It appears that the Giza pyramids were built as beacons by extraterrestrials as part of a landing corridor ending at the spaceport in the Sinai Desert.
Many now believe our own space program has found a connection between the Great Pyramid of Egypt and pyramids found on other planets.
We may discover that we, in fact, were the Martians.
Experts now believe that the Great Pyramid is finally giving up some of its secrets because, like the Egyptians, we have turned our attentions to the skies. Is there an alien connection? The amazing and controversial answers in this chapter of the UFO Diaries.
The pyramids of Egypt have been the objects of mystery and controversy for thousands of years. Scholars, ancient and modern, have argued over how they were built, why they were built, and who built them.
The traditional view is that the pyramids were built by Egyptians of the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BC, as burial tombs for the pharaohs of that period. But is that view sustainable in light of what we know today? Many experts insist the ancient Egyptians could not have built these marvelous structures. And if they didn't, shouldn't we learn who built them and why?
Archaeologists have told us for decades now that many of the Egyptians of 4,000 years ago worshiped the sun and believed in fantastic beings who came down from the sky to bring knowledge and wisdom to mankind. Is this a clue to the real origin of the pyramids? Do recent discoveries on other planets tell us more about the pyramids of Egypt? Is it possible that these structures were constructed by the same architects?
Could the true nature of the pyramids hold the answer to the mysteries of mankind's existence on Earth?
All of these questions are mere speculation without more evidence that the pyramids are anything more than what they appear to be. 3 gigantic piles of carved stones on the edge of the desert at Giza.
The largest has been attributed to the pharaoh Cheops, but it is more widely known as simply the Great Pyramid. Many scientists agree that physically, mathematically, and scientifically, the Great Pyramid of Khufu could not have been built. And yet, there it is, 42 stories high, covering an area the size of 10 football fields, an almost solid mass of intricately fitted stone blocks, each weighing 2.5 to 10 tons. Enough stone to build 35 Empire State Buildings, with several tons left over. Its alignment to true north is almost perfect, and the precision of its construction has never been duplicated.
But could the Egyptians of over 4,000 years ago have built such a magnificent structure? Or should we look for a more advanced civilization behind the pyramids?
The Greek historian Herodotus established the traditional view when he visited Egypt in the 5th century BC and wrote that Egyptian crews of 100,000 men, replaced every 3 months, built the Great Pyramid in 20 years. But is that possible?
To build the Great Pyramid in 20 years, as some archaeologists claim, would have meant setting one of those huge stones every 3.5 minutes, 24 hours a day. That would require a technology we don't have today.
But getting the stones in place was only part of the problem. How did they manage to get these massive stones from the quarries to the building site?
There's a widespread general belief, which Hollywood has helped to promote, that hundreds of thousands of slaves were used to build the pyramids. Nothing could be further from the truth.
The Egyptians of the 4th dynasty were neither a formidable military nation nor a very aggressive one. But even if they were, there were not enough potential slaves within a 5,000-mile radius to have supplied the workforce needed.
But if there was not enough manpower available, how could the work have been done? Even if the builders used some kind of clever machinery to help them get the great blocks into place, Egyptologists still disagree on what kind of device that could have been.
The generally accepted academic viewpoints are divided equally between the rollers and the rampers. These two theories are being taught in the schools right now as facts, when they're not even substantial theories.
With the Ramper School of Egyptology, we are asked to believe that a mile-long ramp was built, rising in slope as the pyramid increased in height. Actually, it would have required more effort to build the ramp than to build the pyramid itself. there would have been some 6 billion pounds of construction garbage to get rid of afterwards.
If the ramp theory is discredited, the remaining explanation is that the blocks were rolled on logs. But does that theory survive close scrutiny?
Moving a given stone in this manner can be demonstrated, but some rather obvious consideration should have dispelled this notion long ago. The only trees available in ancient Egypt were date palms, and as a food source, it's unlikely they would have been cut down. Importing logs would have required more shipping than Egypt has ever possessed in its entire history, just to transport the 25 million trees needed. Next, it's virtually impossible to roll a log on stone-chip roads. But even if they could be rolled, the great weight of the stones would have crushed the logs to pulp within a very short distance.
The traditional explanations of the origin of the pyramids have been accepted for years. But should we carefully re-examine those long-held notions? The discrepancies between the theories and the facts seem to demand it.
Amazingly, the sciences of geology, mathematics, and astronomy seem to reach their zenith with the construction of the Great Pyramid. Construction techniques were used that can't be duplicated today. How could this be? What did the builders of the Great Pyramid know that we don't? More to the point, where did they learn it? And what new scientific evidence is there that suggests an alien connection?
However the Great Pyramid was built, one thing seems certain. Tremendous power of some sort had to be employed. Since the ancient Egyptians, so far as we know, were dependent solely on muscle power, and that seems insufficient to the purpose, what was the force that put all those gigantic stone blocks so carefully into place?
And keep our minds open to perhaps at some point learning that this is a very real possibility, that other civilizations, other beings, maybe perhaps from other planets, solar systems, or galaxies, assisted the Egyptians in the construction of the pyramids.
Supposing that some traveling race from another world did in fact build the pyramids, did they leave any clues as to the purpose of these structures?
Some experts say the answer lies in the foundation and orientation of the Great Pyramid.
It's doubtful that ancient Egyptians had any knowledge of modern geology, and without this science, it's inconceivable that a structure this size could be built which would not crumble from lack of a proper foundation. Normally, it would just sink slowly into the ground. In modern construction, engineers find a settling rate of 6 inches in 100 years acceptable for office buildings. In 5,000 years, the Great Pyramid, weighing 14 billion pounds, has settled less than 1/2 inch.
This engineering marvel does suggest that whoever built the pyramids not only intended for the structures to remain as they were for millennia, but knew how to achieve that goal. And as engineers now tell us, they also knew how to keep the 4 sides of that giant edifice in almost perfect alignment.
In modern construction, if the builders could maintain each side of the 756-foot wall within 6 inches of being perfectly straight, then it would be a tremendous accomplishment. But the Great Pyramid is only off of straight alignment by approximately 1/4 of an inch. That's totally impossible to duplicate in today's modern construction field.
The Great Pyramid is evidence of a phenomenal knowledge of the science of astronomy. They could measure the day, the year, and the precession of the equinoxes. They knew that the Earth was a sphere, and they knew how to compute latitude and longitude accurately.
The geographical orientation of the Great Pyramid of Giza is perhaps its single most amazing characteristic. Its sides run almost exactly from north to south and east to west. The deviation is within 3 arc minutes from true north. How could an ancient quasi-Stone Age culture have been able to determine true north?
And while Europeans would argue for centuries about whether or not the Earth was flat, the ancient Egyptians, or someone thousands of years earlier, had calculated the longitude and latitude of the Earth as a sphere. Could it have been the 4th dynasty Egyptians?
There have been 2 recent hard scientific discoveries about the pyramid in Egypt, which are not consistent with the Egyptologists' presumption that it was a tomb built by a king. Those 2 things are the radioactive dating, radiocarbon dating of the mortar from the top to bottom, which indicates that the top is 1,000 years older than the bottom. Or the other discovery was the radioactive sand found in 1987 in a set of chambers just behind the Queen's Chamber in the center of the pyramid. We have placed these 2 discoveries together to come up with a very consistent explanation for both. The strange curve, top to bottom, looks like an exposure curve. If you have a radioactive source in the center of the pyramid, the radioactive sand is exactly where we had calculated such a radioactive source to irradiate the pyramid might be found.
Could it be that the Great Pyramid was constructed with what was simply routine technology to a race of beings capable of something like atomic power and interstellar travel?
But as the evidence for an extraterrestrial origin of the pyramids begins to mount, we encounter what appears to be a warning not to explore the matter too deeply.
Because some scientists claim they have encountered a powerful negative force inside the Great Pyramid, a force they called the Curse of the Pharaohs.
The Curse of the Pharaohs story begins in the 1920s when two Englishmen, Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon, discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Among the spectacular riches, Carter and Carnarvon uncovered a tablet on which a dire curse had been written. Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the peace of Pharaoh. The warning did not make them nervous, but they were afraid their native assistants might panic and quit. They crossed out any mention of the tablet's discovery from their records and tossed it into the rubble. The whole incident might have been forgotten forever had not some 36 scholars and others connected with the excavation died sudden and mysterious deaths. Carnarvon and Carter were about to uncover the mummy itself when Lord Carnarvon became deathly ill. Although suspecting an infection, doctors were uncertain of a diagnosis. He died before his son reached his bedside, and precisely at the moment of his death, an unexplainable power blackout occurred all over Cairo. Another victim was American architect Arthur Mace, who had been the person to rip out the last piece of wall blocking the entrance to the tomb. He died in the same hotel with the same symptoms as Carnarvon, feverish and in a sudden coma. The morning after Carter had shown his friend George Gould the tomb, Gould awoke with a high fever. By nightfall, he was dead. Radiologist Archibald Douglas Reed was the first to cut the mummy's wrapping and x-ray it. Reed died aboard ship on his way home to England.
According to historians of the Curse of the Pharaohs, an eminent physician and biologist in Cairo, Dr. Ezzedine Taha, claimed discovery of an ancient microscopic fungus that had probably survived in a dormant state for thousands of years, which could be controlled by modern antibiotics. Ironically, before he could prove his theory, Dr. Taha died in a freak automobile accident.
Assuming that the pyramids were built by some race far more advanced than the ancient Egyptians, did they leave behind this strange fungus as a sort of burglar alarm? A measure to keep humans from tampering with the pyramid?
What deadly secret lies in the forbidden heart of the Great Pyramid? Some believe the great granite slabs above the king's chamber, called spirit stones by the Egyptians, once served some fantastic function. Are they still functioning? Could they be the key to the real purpose of the pyramid?
We know that whoever constructed the Great Pyramid of Giza built it so that it would last a long, long time. Archaeologists tell us that the structure was originally covered with a protective stone coating, making the sides perfectly flat and smooth. That outer surface was broken apart and used as building materials during the construction of the city of Cairo, but the pyramids themselves still remain unharmed.
And we've already heard how the pyramid is unique among all buildings on Earth in its refusal to settle into the ground, as other giant monuments inevitably must. And we've heard of the Curse of the Pharaohs, where something seemed to have been at work in killing all who explored too deep.
Apparently, whoever built the pyramid wanted it to be left exactly as it was. But why? What was its purpose? And was its preservation important because they planned to use it again someday?
In the early 1950s, translation was begun on a vast library of cuneiform tablets that had been discovered many years earlier in the ruins of the Library of Nineveh, the oldest written record known to science. One passage of the text seems to describe the pyramids of Egypt.
Sumerian texts are believed to be over 10,000 years old, 6,000 years older than the Egyptians who were supposed to have built the pyramids. But if the Sumerian translation is accurate, the pyramids were already there before the first pharaoh was born.
If all of this is true, then these ancient tablets may hold the answer to the true purpose of the pyramids. Dr. Zechariah Sitchin has spent years studying the mysteries of these Sumerian writings.
Based on evidence provided by Sumerian texts, it appears that the Giza pyramids were built as beacons by extraterrestrials as part of a landing corridor ending at a spaceport in the Sinai Desert.
An intriguing and exotic theory. But how could the pyramids be of use to travelers from another world? After all, as large as they are not visible from outer space.
Some people suggested there is a vortex of energy coming out of the great apex of the pyramid, and that it actually expands in diameter as you go higher above the pyramid.
But for this theory to be credible, the pyramids would have to radiate energy, which an ordinary pile of stones simply does not do. But are the pyramids different in this way?
The pyramids are essentially crystalline in structure, therefore highly receptive to radio-like energy waves or even cosmic microwaves. The Great Pyramid at Giza, with its 5 granite slabs above the king's chamber, are what the ancient Egyptians called spirit stone, and they could have been a massive receiver-transmitter tuned to some distant part of the universe of which we are still ignorant.
There's a vortex of energy emanating from the apex of the pyramid, which actually expands in diameter as it rises higher and higher into the heavens. A simple example of this emanating apex energy was first demonstrated by British inventor Sir W. Siemens. When he drank from the wine bottle he brought along, he experienced a slight shock as the bottle touched his lips. The electrical activity intrigued Siemens so much that he took a wet newspaper, wrapped it around the bottle, converting it into a crude electrical accumulator, which most high school science students would recognize as a Leyden jar. Although we don't know why or how, the Great Pyramid seems to be an accumulator of energies.
The only person of record, of authority, who still stands behind the assertion that there was radioactive sand was Dr. Ibram Nawawi, who gave in 1987 a discussion at an archaeological conference in Tennessee where a friend of mine, another archaeologist, literally heard him say with his own lips that they had found highly radioactive sand in the Great Pyramid. This does not compute as a low-tech structure, but something much, much more intriguing.
So might not the pyramids have been exactly what the ancient Sumerian texts seem to claim? A sort of cosmic lighthouse for passing space travelers?
As incredible as this may sound, it does seem to be the first explanation of the Great Pyramids that truly covers all the facts of its amazing construction, placement, and design. But is there any other evidence that the builders of these remarkable edifices were from outer space?
These same Sumerian texts also refer to the Earth as the 7th planet, as if being counted from the outside of our solar system in toward the sun. Since Neptune and Pluto were only discovered in this century, how could the Sumerians of 10,000 years ago have known that the Earth is indeed the 7th planet? According to Dr. Sitchin, no one but space travelers coming to Earth past Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars could have considered Earth the 7th planet.
Has modern science discovered any other reason to believe that the Great Pyramids were not the product of humans?
Our space program may have discovered the most amazing connection of all, pyramids on Mars that correspond precisely to the pyramids of Egypt.
Our quest for the truth about the Great Pyramid at Giza has now taken us into outer space, and to the theory that beings from another world may have actually built this colossal monument for their own purposes. And now we begin to make our own voyages to other planets, exploring the vast reaches of our own solar system. But have our meager explorations to date helped us to find the answer to the pyramid mystery, or simply raised more questions?
The fundamental mathematical relationships communicated by the structures at Cydonia are now eerily replicated in the Giza complex here on Earth, including the very placement of the Sphinx. Even the key latitude of Giza, north of the equator, is now directly linked to the D&M pyramid latitude at Cydonia on Mars. So we can't tell who the builders were. There is a clue, however, and it's in this mile-long, 1,500-foot-high humanoid face. Our thinking now, our team's thinking, is that that face is our face, or what we once were. So in a sense, someday, not now, but someday, we may discover that we, in fact, were the Martians.
Are the so-called pyramids of Mars merely bizarre natural formations? Or are they the ruins of carefully constructed monuments that have been abandoned for many thousands of years? It does stand to reason that voyagers traveling across our entire solar system might place such markers or beacons on more than one world.
Even so, the notion of extraterrestrial visitors constructing the pyramids of Egypt may seem to many to be simply too outrageous. Is it not possible, after all, that the ancient Egyptians were simply far more advanced than we'd previously believed?
Don't the theories of alien pyramid builders ignore the ancient Egyptians and any contribution they might have made in the creation of the Great Pyramid? Certainly. But then, the Egyptians themselves seem to have ignored it also.
The Great Pyramid was the greatest single undertaking in the whole history of mankind. And yet there's not one picture or drawing, not one artifact, not one inventory or tally sheet to tell of its construction. The Egyptians left us some 3,000 years of written and pictorial history, covering virtually everything that happened in their culture, from babies being born to plowing and harvesting, building, weaving, sacrificing, praying, embalming, but nothing about the pyramids of Giza. Why?
When you enter the Great Pyramid, it's devoid of these hieroglyphs. And the answer is simple and explained by the fact that the Great Pyramid was not built by Egyptians. The Great Pyramid was built by a group of people which are known as Hyksos, or shepherd kings, rulers of foreign countries that came into Egypt and constructed the Great Pyramid with better methodology.
In light of all the new findings, experts seem to be reaching the same conclusion. Could it be that the proof of extraterrestrial visitation to Earth has, for centuries, been right there before our very eyes?
Do Egyptian records fail to mention the construction of the pyramids because they were already there when the Nile Valley culture began to flourish? Is this the final proof that the pyramids are the keepers of a mystery that we may never solve?
Until that time, the pyramids continue to stand silent and mysterious, refusing to allow their secrets to become a completed chapter of the UFO Diaries.
Is the United States government hiding significant, even crucial information about UFOs? Was the Air Force Project Blue Book just an elaborate cover-up designed to prevent the public from learning the truth? Why was the project summarily dropped? Were too many people getting too close to the amazing facts already in the possession of the Air Force? The search for the astounding truth behind Project Blue Book in this chapter of UFO Diaries. The mystery behind the UFO phenomenon has puzzled people all over the world. What are these things? Where do they come from? And what is their purpose here? Do all the unidentified objects seen by thousands of witnesses always turn out to be something familiar or natural? Or are they sometimes proven to be something not made on Earth? If even a few of the UFOs sighted are in fact visitors from another world, how should the governments of our world react? Should they treat these strange flying craft as friends or assume them to be enemies?
How have we responded to UFOs in the past? Has an official policy ever been stated by the leaders of our planet's nations?
The American government's policy on UFOs has taken some bizarre twists and turns in the last 50 years.
To the best of our knowledge, this all began in 1947 with a private plane flying over Washington state.
A businessman, Kenneth Arnold, saw 9 crescent-shaped objects flying in an echelon formation near Mount Rainier.
And he naturally thought that these were planes, but they were not behaving like any airplanes he had seen.
He told reporters at Yakima, Washington, that the motion of the objects he'd seen was like that of a saucer skipping across a pond.
This was the first sighting to really stick in the public mind, and it gave it the term flying saucers.
Based on Arnold's experience as a pilot, based on his credibility as a businessman, there seemed to be little reason not to accept what he'd said. When the Air Force finally issued their official explanation for the Arnold sighting, they said it was a mirage, some kind of apparition floating in the atmosphere.
After that sighting, hundreds of people saw objects in the sky and reported them to the Army Air Force. And in September 1947, Lieutenant General Nathan Twining, head of Air Materiel Command, wrote to the Office of the Commanding General of the Army Air Forces. And in this letter, he strongly recommended that an official investigation be carried out. And on December 30th that year, a project was approved and given space at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. The general public knew that the Air Force had started some kind of hunt for flying saucers, so the operation was widely referred to as Project Saucer, but its official code name was Project Sign. Now, Project Sign supposedly was an earnest attempt to discover the truth about UFOs, but from its very first investigation, it was clear that something else was going on behind the scenes. What appeared to be going on was an attempt to conceal the whole truth about the matter. And this was especially tragic because the first known investigation involved the loss of life in pursuit of an alien vehicle. On January 7th, 1948, Flight Commander Thomas Mantell was ordered to investigate a UFO flying over Godman Field, Kentucky. After climbing to 23,000 feet, ground personnel lost sight of Captain Mantell and the alien vehicle. But he reported by radio that he was still closing in on what he described, a tremendous metallic object. And as far as we know, that was Captain Mantell's last message. At 5 p.m. that night, the wreckage of Captain Mantell's P-51 airplane was discovered, with his body still in the cockpit.
What really happened? Was Mantell's plane destroyed because it came too close to a UFO?
We know this, that every tiny piece of wreckage of his plane was vacuumed up and hauled away and classified. Why?
Because he was reporting live to the control tower what he was seeing and what he was doing, up to the point where he apparently passed out from lack of oxygen. And of course, Project Sign investigated and decided what everybody was really seeing was planet Venus.
The Air Force said some of the most stupid things to explain Captain Mantell's death. Captain was a very highly trained pilot, very experienced, intelligent young man. They insulted his intelligence, first of all, by saying he'd been following the planet Venus. They also stated that he climbed too high, got out of his oxygen, passed out, and crashed. The excuses that they come up with to explain events of this kind are absolutely absurd.
Anything given to Project Sign had to be purged and passed down from upstairs after they found a way to successfully explain it away, either that it was Venus, a star.
But the fact the Air Force ultimately dismissed this sighting as nothing more than Venus suggests they weren't interested in solving the mystery.
In 1947, the United States was just recovering from the Second World War and entering into the earliest days of the Cold War. So it must have been very reassuring to believe that nothing could happen in the sky that the Air Force could not explain. But was that in fact the case? Were UFO reports quickly dismissed because they were all simple cases of mistaken identity? Or was there another reason?
Project Sign continued to find explanations for many of the sightings that were reported to them. But in the early morning of July 24, 1948, something happened that Project Sign could not explain, and that opened the door to a whole new era of UFO investigation. What was this event that changed the course of the official military investigation into UFOs? If the Air Force study of UFOs had at first been skeptical, what caused them to change their minds? Just after 2 a.m. on July 24, 1948, a DC-3 passenger plane was 5,000 feet above Montgomery, Alabama, when the crew and one passenger reported seeing an aircraft unlike any they'd ever seen or heard of. The witnesses were certain that it was neither an airplane nor a weather balloon.
When Project Sign investigated the object seen over Montgomery, Alabama, they discovered that two people on the ground had seen the same thing. Taken all together, these sightings were something that Project Sign could not dismiss as a meteor or a reflection. This was obviously some kind of craft, but there was nothing like it in 1948, at least in our inventory.
But did this unique UFO sighting really change the philosophy of Project Sign?
A problem came when the staff members who were originally briefed to believe that they were going to have all the information that the Air Force had, came to an independent conclusion that there was more to this than they were advocating.
And the reality and the facts that were sensitive, that really indicated we were dealing with extraterrestrial technology, was never, ever released. There was policy decisions made that that information would never get out. So they would either explain it away or they would insult whoever made the report, and they would even end up insulting some of their own Air Force pilots, which is an absurdity.
I've investigated pilot sightings for many years, and there's a number of reasons why I have chosen pilots as a specialty. One is that they're highly trained. They are in an environment which has a good visibility, usually. Vantage in many directions, for instance. And in fact, they can change the direction of their airplane to follow the phenomenon. Another reason is that many aircraft have special instruments on board that might pick up electromagnetic energy. They can use their radios to call to the ground and ask for assistance, radar perhaps, or weather, or military assistance of some sort, so that they're not just isolated witnesses anymore, but they might be accompanied by other professionals.
If pilots are such credible witnesses, why didn't the Air Force appear to take numerous sighting reports seriously?
I know it's been suggested that our government and other governments have been denying or covering up UFO evidence. If that's true, it's easy to understand. It could be that they are trying to protect some advanced technology development that they're working on. But I think there may be another reason, and that is that if the phenomenon is real, and they know it's real, then they don't want to admit to the public that they can't protect us from the phenomenon.
In 1948, in Project Sign, something called the Estimate of the Situation was written. There's controversy about what was in the Estimate of the Situation and who wrote it, but it stated essentially that this was an extraterrestrial phenomenon, and then went on apparently to give various insights about propulsion systems and things like that. The Estimate of the Situation was then sent to George Vandenberg, who was Air Force Chief of Staff at the time. Vandenberg took a look at this estimate and just thought that the document was just ridiculous, nonsense. He ordered all the copies of it destroyed, and they were, which is why we don't really know what was in it.
If the report contained nothing of a secret nature, why was the order given for it to be destroyed?
General Hoyt Vandenberg was in a position to know the highest secrets of government at the time. He would have known things that he couldn't even tell to the men of Project Sign. And apparently when Project Sign made a report stating flat out that they were extraterrestrial, they evidently hit on something he already knew. So the only thing he could do was reject the report and order every copy of it destroyed. From that time on, we can trace the deliberate attempt on the part of some, not all, of the Air Force to conceal the truth about UFOs.
Every major European power, including the United States, is involved with this research in trying to keep the lid on this thing, to keep the cover on it, to control the release of the information.
But why? Why would the U.S. government first set up a project to learn the truth about UFOs and then destroy its findings? Had Project Sign uncovered a secret it was not supposed to learn? In any case, since Project Sign had incurred the anger of the Air Force Chief of Staff, it should come as no surprise that the project was then disbanded.
Project Sign was eventually changed to Project Grudge to get out what were considered to be soft-minded people, making Project Grudge a little bit more hard-nosed.
And it seemed that they took a whole other vantage point and really tried to collect those people that were willing to put more of a mundane explanation on UFOs.
And Project Grudge then went on to become more of a debunking outfit.
But once again, a remarkable incident forced the military to reconsider. In 1951, Army Signal Corps radar tracking stations at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, spotted a number of fast-moving unknowns over that military base. These same objects were seen by people on the ground, and they were reported to approach and depart from the area repeatedly.
By now, the U.S. was becoming involved in the Korean conflict, and it was the height of the Cold War. Any object traveling that fast on radar was assumed to be an enemy missile. This missile was repeatedly violating our airspace at a speed so fast that we could not possibly intercept it.
There were government authorities and scientists who had concluded from the very beginning that the evidence that they had indicated that we were dealing with an extraterrestrial intelligence.
First of all, it was a major sighting year. The 1952 wave was one of the largest waves of sightings that we had.
They either had to explain away the event and tell people that they misunderstood that they were looking at Venus or whatever. They came up with some of the most absurd answers, and they insulted the intelligence of a lot of American people.
The problem was, even Project Grudge had a significant number of cases which could not be identified.
Many people were becoming frightened. The nation turned to the Air Force for explanations.
The Air Force, no matter how much they tried, couldn't really get away from having to deal with the situation, and there continued to be UFO reports.
By 1951, Project Grudge became Project Blue Book,
which was, quote-unquote, the open project, which was to be able to study and collect reports.
By the 1950s, Americans were reporting UFO sightings in ever-increasing numbers. Most people were very eager for an official explanation of the strange phenomenon they'd witnessed, and they assumed that any such reassurance would ultimately come from the Air Force itself. But if the claims made by some UFO researchers are true, the United States government created a special operation for researching unidentified flying objects, but then dictated what the project would find and what it would not find.
So the Air Force embarked on a mission to go forward and reduce the number of reports to a minimum.
The order was to find explanations for UFO sightings, but not necessarily the correct ones.
And their identifications became outlandish, totally unrelated to what people were seeing, and what they were looking at was not a UFO, obviously. It was something else. Once the reports were reduced to a minimum, it would show people that everything in the sky could be identified.
The Air Force wanted to be able to say, we have the situation under control. After 1953, Project Blue Book was not trying to find out whether there were visitors from outer space.
But assuming that some UFOs were in fact visitors from another world, how could such a fact be kept secret?
Project Blue Book had its sort of glory days in 1952. The head of Project Blue Book at this time was a man named Captain Ed Ruppelt. Ruppelt was a fair-minded individual who took it upon himself to try to solve the UFO mystery.
The credible people telling the incredible stories, as Dr. Hynek used to say.
In this way, Ruppelt was very much like the project's chief science consultant, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Hynek had been part of the operation since the days of Project Sign as an expert astronomer and a UFO skeptic. Ruppelt and Hynek began their study, and what they learned convinced them both that UFOs represented intelligence not of this earth.
And if Ruppelt and Hynek had any doubts, nothing could have changed their minds quicker than the events of July 1952.
A series of objects were seen flying over the Capitol building and the White House by pilots, by radar operators on radar equipment, and by civilians on the street.
The objects made right-angle turns, extremely fast accelerations, things that are impossible for aircraft of 1952.
Exactly 7 days later, on July 26th, 1952, objects were seen over the Capitol grounds again. An intercept was ordered again, and this time the objects were still there when the planes came. The planes chased the objects for a while, and afterwards the objects flew away. But the press got wind of this. There were sensational headlines across the country, and suddenly the Pentagon was swamped with inquiries, with calls about what was going on. Are we being invaded? Should we run for the hills? What should we do?
Meanwhile, the Air Force held an official press conference. They reported that the radar sightings had not been an attack on the U.S. Capitol, but were simply a temperature inversion. They claimed that pockets of cold air caused the radar to pick up reflections from the ground and mistake them for flying objects. The naked eye sightings were blamed on meteors and the normal excitement of witnesses. It was, after all, the stated mission of Blue Book to investigate and explain these types of sightings.
There were so many calls into the Pentagon that the Air Force and the CIA actually became a little bit worried that these calls would be disrupting the normal channels of military intelligence. So the CIA organized a panel of scientists to look at the subject sort of secretly. This was known as the Robertson Panel, which met in January of 1953.
They sifted through the mountains of evidence compiled by Project Blue Book, the films, the pictures, the movies, and all. After spending only 12 hours reviewing 6 years of research, they issued their report. This was the highest level of our government at work.
If the Air Force had set up Projects Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book for the purpose of explaining UFO sightings, why would the Central Intelligence Agency make its own study of the UFO phenomenon?
Blue Book was merely a public relations front. It was never seriously a program to investigate and determine what was really going on.
Well, it looked like they simply wanted to find out whether UFOs were a secret Soviet weapon or not, and if the UFO situation was as it appeared to be, whether there was an opportunity for the Soviets to use it against the United States.
5 major scientists looked at the subject and decided some very critical things. They decided, first of all, that the objects themselves probably were not extraterrestrial. In other words, they couldn't see, they couldn't understand the evidence for the extraterrestrial aspect of the phenomenon. But they decided that reports, not the objects, but the reports themselves, did in fact constitute a threat to the national security.
They began at that point a systematic program of deception, demystification, and disinformation, and those 3 aspects apparently have continued to this day.
They made no attempt to explain what UFOs were. They just set down a policy to teach people that flying saucers didn't exist.
Therefore, the Robertson Panel endowed the Air Force with a mission. And the mission was not to study UFOs, not to try to get to the bottom of the UFO mystery, but to reduce the number of reports to a minimum and thereby end the threat to national security. People throughout the society began to criticize the Air Force for not doing its job. And the next thing you knew, the Air Force had a public relations headache on its hands.
From that time on, the Air Force was no longer interested in Project Blue Book. And finally, in December of 1969, they shut it down completely.
Subsequent documents that have been obtained by UFO researchers have shown otherwise, that the Air Force, the military, the CIA, the National Security Agency, a lot of agencies within our own government have been keeping tabs on the field.
The Freedom of Information Act has limited values to the American people, because the National Security Act that was passed at the end of World War II, during the Cold War, states very clearly that any subject or any item of information that could be construed to be threatening to the national security of the United States cannot and will not be released. Now, the Cold War is over. Who is the enemy now? Why are those limitations of the National Security Act still being applied? Why are they still keeping it from us? Under what excuse? Who's our enemy? You come to the conclusion today that people in Washington, at least some of the national security people, look upon the American people as the enemy.
The Air Force has documents on file showing that UFOs have violated our airspace. And if the things that fly right through our radar and violate our airspace aren't a threat to this government, I don't know what is.
If these things are true, then one all-important question still remains. Why?
It's quite simple. They know. They've known for 50 years that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth.
The Air Force believes the truth is simply too much for us to handle, and so they lie to us instead.
The quest for the truth about Blue Book and other UFO studies is a tangled mess. Perhaps it's true that the government has used these studies to hide what they really know. Or perhaps they once made a valiant effort to solve a puzzle that is simply beyond human understanding. If so, the real truth may forever be a sealed chapter of the UFO Diaries.